was just in the last couple of days they've gone and recovered these guns. And that was 7 months after the fact. And she said to me, well, that's funny that, because 10 days ago I'd spoken to them, asked them what they were going to do about it. Obviously that sparked them into life briefly. And big surprise, you know, different guns.
Different guns.
Yeah, funny that. After 7 months, you know, they had the ballistics for the bullets that they dug out of the ground next to the helicopter, but they didn't have the guns because they gave them back to them.
Here's the latest statement, Phil, we have from police today. This matter was investigated thoroughly. This included speaking with a number of people in the forensic examination of items. Despite a full investigation, there was insufficient evidence to lay criminal charges. What do you think of that result?
Well, there was insufficient evidence because they gave the evidence back to them. On the day where they were shooting at my clients and my pilot, they gave the guns back. The guys admitted, you know, the offenders admitted to poaching. They could see each other. They could see the helicopter. The guys at the top could see these guys in their ute. There was no argument about identifying the target. These guys are out to cause some harm. And the police didn't seem to accept our story.
And yet it was a clear-cut story, wasn't it? You dug the bullets out of the ground.
Yeah, the cops that we flew in there actually made the comment, lucky nobody died. And I said, yeah, what do you think? And that's why I said, so you've got the bullets, now you've got the guns. And they said, oh, no, we haven't got the guns, we gave them back to them. I said, huh, great. You know? So those are obviously not going to be the same guns that they collected 7 months later.
How would you sum up your feelings now about how all this has been handled?
Well, it's just what comes to mind is Keystone Cops. You know, they obviously got their licence out of the Weet-Bix packet. I mean, the first thing I would have done is held the guns. And I'm actually more annoyed with the cops than these actually other characters. I mean, actually, I've just learned that one of the offenders is up on some other arms charges now.
It doesn't.
Someone was shot by the same person. I mean, I would be holding those cops accountable for that.
It doesn't sound from what we get from the police today that you are going to get a result here.
No, and that's why it's a bit frustrating because, you know, where do you go to from here? The police obviously have no interest in it. I mean, if it had been you or I, I'm sure we would have been arrested and we would have lost your gun, your arms licence, you would have lost the guns, you would have lost the vehicle that you were using, because that's the new rules now with poaching. You lose everything, even your dog, if you got a dog with it. But these guys seem to have a, you know, go free, get out of jail card. And I can only assume that there's some, you know, there's a conflict of interest somewhere with some of these cops involved.
Oh, well, yeah, we're not sure about that, but anyway, interesting.
Well, I mean, I think I've got the right to assume that because I've had no feedback from the police at all. They haven't offered counselling to my clients.
No, fair enough, Phil. I've got to jettison the conversation only because of the time, which it's almost time to go. Matt Nippert, Nadine Higgins, nice to have your company today.
Thank you for having me.
Been a pleasure, Jim.
And we'll end with a bit of family togetherness. The LeBaron family, they'll see us out today. Checkpoint follows soon. Have a lovely weekend.
Toti mai rai, hoa mai he kōrero, kei te haere he kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Welcome everyone. Tonight on Checkpoint, what happened to get the re-repair bill in Canterbury to $270 million? The 21-year-old American charged with causing the accident that killed 2 people in Northland on Monday night gets bail, his passport back and permission to leave the country. Edgecumbe, a year to the day after the flooding. How does a little town submerged under so much water come back? The school with only 1 pupil, we're there 50 years after the Wahine disaster. One of the rescuers that terrible day attempts to find out what happened to the terrified little boy he held as survivors were taken from the beach. And we're on the GC for the Commonwealth Games.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. A lawyer representing Canterbury homeowners with failed EQC work says claims by Jerry Brownlee that their repairs were not botched are outrageous. It's been revealed that the bill to fix substandard EQC repairs from the Canterbury earthquakes has hit $270 million, 4 times a government estimate just 2 years ago. Mr Brownlee, the former Canterbury Rebuild Minister, says some unsatisfactory repairs that had to be redone could have been caused by subsequent earthquakes. But Peter Woods, who's represented hundreds of claimants, says his clients will be very disappointed by Mr Brownlee's comments.
That's an outrageous statement. EQC knows that the work has been botched. They know that the assessments were inadequate and they know that the work was botched. And to say, oh, it was actually subsequent damage is far-fetched.
Peter Woods, whose firm Anthony Harper has represented about 200 claimants. The Prime Minister says the government will do its best to weed out mistakes and correct those it does make quickly. This week, the Associate Environment Minister, Wahine, admitted misleading Parliament when she said she had discussed the Environmental Protection Authority's chief scientist with the authority's chief executive. Officials also contradicted the Regional Development Minister, Shane Jones, saying he had been fully aware experts believed a project he was about to fund was a lemon. Mr Jones conceded he had been made aware of the advice, but it had slipped his mind. Jacinda Ardern says mistakes will happen.
With all of these cases, they are within context issues that easily occur when you have an extraordinary amount of workflow coming through. Ministers of all stripes make mistakes. We've just got to make sure we correct them quickly.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. Myrtle rust has spread to the South Island for the first time, and government agencies are now giving up on trying to eradicate the disease. The Ministry for Primary Industries says the destructive plant disease has been confirmed in the Tasman region. A spokesperson for the ministry, Dr Catherine Duthie, says the wind-borne pernicious nature of the disease has made it impossible to stamp out. Dr Duthie says the program will now change tack to managing the disease long term. The Justice Minister says he would be concerned if Immigration New Zealand's profiling program was discriminatory. Over the past 18 months, Immigration New Zealand has piloted data modelling using age, gender and ethnicity of overstayers to identify groups likely to run up hospital costs or commit crime. The agency rejects claims of racial profiling. Tom Furley reports.
Critics have called the program racist and say it targets certain nationalities. The Human Rights Commissioner and the Privacy Commissioner have asked for more information. The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, says he was surprised to hear about the pilot program and says he'd be concerned about anything that looks like discrimination. He says he's spoken to the Immigration Minister, Ian Lees-Galloway, who will raise questions when he's briefed by officials on Monday. This is Tom Furley.
Russia has warned Britain it is playing with fire and will be sorry during an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council. The meeting was called by Russia to discuss the nerve agent attack on the former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter in the English town of Salisbury, which Britain blames on Moscow. The Russian ambassador Vasily Nebenzia says Britain has no evidence of Moscow's involvement and is leading a coordinated campaign to discredit his country. In response, Britain's ambassador Karen Pierce has defended the British investigation. She says her country has acted according to the rules of the Chemical Weapons Convention.
Mr President, we believe that the UK's actions stand up to any scrutiny. We have acted in accordance with the CWC throughout and through the body charged for these purposes, the OPCW. We have nothing to hide, Mr President, but I do fear that Russia might have something to fear.
Britain's ambassador to the United Nations, Karen Pierce. The Chief Ombudsman says some agencies are failing to follow the Official Information Act. Judge Peter Bosher is now launching a full investigation into how agencies fulfil their obligations under the Act, which allows people to request information held by state agencies. He says a recent meeting with reporters from RNZ News revealed how bad some agencies are when dealing with OIA requests.
The journalists around the table recounted the sheer difficulty they were experiencing in receiving information from agencies, and I was shown some anecdotal examples of slowness and, in one case, a wish by an agency to charge for everything released.
The Chief Ombudsman, Peter Bosher. It's 5:05. The coach of world champion shot putters, Tom Walsh, believes it's unlikely world records will be broken in the athletics competitions at the Commonwealth Games. 2 world records have already been broken in the weightlifting on the Gold Coast, but Dale Stevenson says weightlifters have to meet less stringent drug testing.
World records in athletics are tougher than weightlifting. We don't have weight divisions or different categories, or we also have a better drug testing protocol in athletics than they do in weightlifting, so the records are a lot tougher. So I hope we see one, but statistically it's a lot less likely.
Coach Dale Stevenson. Tom Walsh begins his quest for gold on Sunday in the shot put qualifiers. The Silver Ferns beat Wales 70-44 in their second match of the Games. Boxer David Naika had a convincing first-up win in the 91 kg class as he chases back-to-back Commonwealth Games gold medals. And the New Zealand men's hockey team had a 6-2 win over Canada. The New Zealand Super Rugby Conference leaders, the Hurricanes, host the Sharks at McLean Park in Napier tonight. And the 2015 champion Jordan Spieth has a 2-shot lead after the first round of the US Masters golf tournament at Augusta. He's at 6 under par. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Country Life meets some of the folk peddling a new rural growth industry, cycle tourism. We look forward to this weekend's street races in Ruakaka, where it's better to burn out than it is to rust. And because it's good to learn from our mistakes, we have a Sonic Tonic dedicated to unhealthy options. You can take yours after the news at 7.
And on Lately at 10, we feature Kiwi Rules. The famous and the infamous introduce us to a new New Zealand artist. We'll have an eye not only on music, but books, people and politics, keeping you up to date with the world at the other end of the day and bringing you breaking news as it happens. That's Lately with Karen Hay, on Nights with Brian Crump on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Fine breaks and isolated showers. Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine but cloudy periods and a few showers spreading north tomorrow, clearing in Wairarapa later. Waitomo to Wellington, including the central high country, also Nelson and Marlborough, mainly fine weather. A few showers tomorrow morning and tomorrow afternoon. For Bulla, a few showers turning to rain this evening, then clearing tomorrow morning. Westland and Fiordland rain spreading north, followed by a few showers, but they should clear by tomorrow. Canterbury, cloud increasing, scattered rain spreading from the south this evening, clearing tomorrow for you. For Southland and Otago, rain with heavy falls spreading north, followed by a few showers tonight, but they should clear tomorrow afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, fine weather, but it will turn to a few showers for you tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
And with Anna Thomas. Thank you very much indeed, Anna. Welcome everyone. We begin tonight with the number with which we began last night, $270 million. The sum EQC has so far spent on repairing home repairs done after the Canterbury earthquakes. Now, it should be pointed out, $270 million is not the final repairs total. Potentially nowhere near it. There are more than 300 claims in court against EQC, and as the Minister told us last night, Treasury is now trying to project future liabilities for repairs yet to be done. Again, that number is unknown, the cost unknown, but lawyer Peter Woods, who's represented more than 200 homeowners against EQC, says there's potentially thousands of homes that require remediation that don't even know about it yet. Again, that's an unknown number. And another person with extensive experience of the damage and the failure to repair it correctly asks, what have we learned from it all? Not enough. Lester Bryant is General Manager of a quantity surveying business that has prepared reports for hundreds of homes needing repairs. And he says the issue we need to address still is the scoping, the initial assessments which determine the extent of the damage and the repair work required, both in Christchurch and in future events like this. Bad scoping, he says, is where almost all the repair issues started.
And the scoping had no set standard, no set methodology, and because of its inadequacy, it essentially meant that a lot of repairs that were done or repairs that aren't being done are based around the arguments from a lack of recording damage properly. And the re-repairs, which are going to continue to occur, all happen because of a very poor scoping standard. Now, I liken it to a medical term where they talk about prescription without diagnosis as malpractice. And we've got the same thing in the buildings here, is that properties were maldiagnosed, the repairs were set in place, and even if the repairs were successful or good quality workmanship, they will ultimately fail. And I know of a number of properties that have had more than 2 repairs done to them, and they keep failing because the diagnosis is wrong, the methodology is wrong, and subsequently the offers are completely inadequate. They will not get a true settlement on their claim.
And Lester, was the initial flawed scope the first domino to fall? In other words, did everything start from that failed initial assessment?
Yeah, it did. And in fact, I don't... the lack of addressing that issue has caused most of the issues that have subsequently occurred. The scoping is the significant issue.
So, and this is the big question, isn't it? Do you think we have any idea yet how many homes where people think the work has been done or was never required actually still require substantial structural work?
Yes, and what I'd appreciate, one of the reasons I'm talking to you, John, is the media putting some attention on the fact that a lot of people have signed off on cash settlements and methodologies with essentially gagging orders or non-disclosure agreements, who have subsequently gone on, they've been paid out cash, gone on to do the repair and found the money was substantially short of what was required. But they can't go to the media, they can't take legal action because there's non-disclosure agreements against those settlements. And on a similar vein, the tradesmen that were involved, because in many or most cases tradesmen were involved in the insurance companies creating their offers, those tradesmen should also have gagging orders removed from them because I work a lot with tradespeople and they are furious at what they've been forced to do. But they can't come forward, they can't whistleblow. It's a significant issue and it's the biggest issue, and I deal with lawyers on this topic. It's the biggest issue we deal with, is a complete disagreement on methodology based on the scope.
Now, I want to interrupt here because this takes us back to the first domino to fall, which was the initial assessment. And what Jerry Brownlee has said, and it is a very reasonable point to make, what Sir Martin Weaver said, is that EQC had a permanent staff of 20-something people at the time of these earthquakes. Suddenly you have tens of thousands of homes that need assessments as fast as possible. So you get people in and they are retired school teachers, retired policemen or women or whatever. They have little or no knowledge about what they're looking for, but they have a checklist. The problem was the checklist didn't send them under the floor as forensically or as often as it should have. But tell me that if this event happens again in one of the cities in New Zealand that is vulnerable to earthquakes, we are better prepared with scopes that will give us meaningful assessments and we will not have to go through all of this again.
Absolutely not. Everyone's at risk. There is no... I still to this day get new scope, DRAs and offers from insurance companies on properties. Like I just had the latest one last week, and they are completely wrong. And you can see it. It's not hard to spot, John.
So we don't have a meaningful, rigorous template for post-earthquake assessment, which would make sense and anyone, including the retired school teacher and the retired policeman, could use.
No, it goes beyond that because you can send... I have no problem sending in a retired teacher to look at a property and all he's doing is recording damage, if that's the first part of a scope. The bricks have fallen off, the wall is cracked, that window's broken, whatever. I have no issues with that. A layman can do that. What I do take an issue with is that diagonal crack in the jib. Is that behind that, is there a structural issue? That hump in the floor, is that a structural issue or a foundation issue? I have an issue with that, and that the people who best know the true, the professionals in the field should be assessing that, diagnosing what the issue is, and sometimes it requires further diagnosis, like a geotechnical report or a land survey report. And once the information is at hand, then you start to say this is the method for repairing that problem. If we don't repair this problem, the issues will continue. Not repairing the crack in the jib when it was really a structural issue caused by a foundational issue. That's my problem with it.
And that brings us back to that line you used before. What was it? Prescription without diagnosis is malpractice? Is that the...
Correct. That's Hippocrates. It's one of his sayings.
Okay, so what you're saying is we were prescribing before we had effectively diagnosed.
Absolutely, and I'll give you an illustration. I've got a property I'm dealing with now. EQC has gone in and repaired the foundation, cracked jib in the house. They've gone in and they've repaired the ring foundation the first time and the cracked jib. But then the foundation started sinking. And the house essentially bowed. So they came in and they jack and packed the house again, and they patched the cracks again, and now it's sinking again. So we're on to a third time. Now the real issue is, and we all know it, it's TC3 land, and the land is de-densified through liquefaction, and it's essentially the land is sitting on jelly and it's completely failing, and the land has to be addressed.
So Lester, this is an issue of spending money repairing a home when the land beneath it needs remediation or is still moving or subsiding or is simply not solid. Now, in those circumstances, spending money on the home when the land is not solid would seem to be a fiscal risk at best. So how much money has been spent on repairs in Canterbury in such circumstances? Do you have any idea?
I would have no doubt it's in the billions of dollars, John. So I'll give you an illustration. We've had properties. I've got one at the moment. It's owned by a policeman. The insurance company assessment and offer was in the region of $300,000. We assessed the property. Now, this has major issues because it's built on rock, and the rock is separated, and there's big drumming and gaps under the floors. And there's also a new stream formed underneath the house because of the earthquake. So there's a massive amount of foundational issues on essentially a block house with retaining walls. And we assessed a thorough repair on that property at over $1.5 million on a $300,000 offer.
$1.5 million?
Versus $300,000, yeah.
Lester Bryant, so it's the scoping in many cases, and we're going to talk about this a bit later. The scoping is the original assessment. What is wrong with your house? How much is it going to cost to repair it? If the scope is wrong, the repairs will be wrong. How do people on the streets of Christchurch feel about $270 million spent to date on re-repairs and the cash settlement of re-repairs? Katie Gossett went to find out.
Well, I think it's awful, isn't it? Yeah, very badly mismanaged, I think.
It's a lot of money. Seems pretty disappointing.
I had a friend whose roof had gotten fixed by EQC and 3 months later it started leaking again. It's pretty slack. I feel like they should be doing a better job.
It's pretty shit. Yeah, it's pretty disappointing.
I think overall EQC have done the best job they could have done. On a positive note, I think, yeah, there's things they could have done differently, but we don't know that until they actually try something. And yeah, we could have saved money, but again, we don't know that until we try something. And it's unfair of us to completely knock them without trying to be constructive and say, yeah, okay, what can we do better in the future?
Well, I think it's very bad. I just can't believe that it's got to that particular amount.
Well, it seems to be very inefficient and unorganised.
As unfortunate as it is that this sort of stuff is still going on, I think it's a matter of moving forward and not dwelling on what's happened, because the more we dwell on it, the less progress is going to be made.
Seriously, they have just gone and refixed my mother's house. They painted half her kitchen ceiling. Half a ceiling? Seriously? Come on. They're cowboys. But they're only doing what they're told, so it's not necessarily the contractor's fault. But it is somebody's fault. If you're going to do it right, do it once.
Well, ridiculous. There should be no need to have repairs of repairs. It's all a giant mess, really, isn't it?
People speaking on the streets of Christchurch this afternoon. We'll go back to Christchurch later in the program. Let's go to Auckland now. We're just making calls on this. A drone around Auckland Airport, which has caused disruption to 7 flights, we understand. CAA says the drone was spotted by 2 pilots on approach to Auckland Airport at about 3 o'clock this afternoon. The drone was flying at an altitude of roughly 1,200 feet and was 3 nautical miles from runway 5 in the direction of Manukau. Air traffic control was able to divert flights away from the area. Police are searching the area for the drone operator. Anyone who knows anything about this is asked to contact police. A drone being operated about 3 nautical miles away from Auckland Airport at roughly 3 o'clock this afternoon. An American visitor to the country has denied causing the crash that killed 2 people near Kerikeri in the far north this week. 2 Northland men, Tevan Tepania and James Hamiora, were killed on Monday night when the Subaru collided with a car driven by Rhys Berger on State Highway 10 north of the Puketona Junction. This morning, the 21-year-old student made his first appearance in the Kaikohe District Court. Our Northland reporter Lois Williams was at the hearing, and I asked her what Rhys Berger had to say.
Well, John, he didn't actually speak, but his lawyer, Mike Dodds, told the court he's going to be pleading not guilty to all 5 charges. That's 2 of causing death by driving carelessly on the wrong side of the road and 3 of causing injury. Now, the police have said that his car was on the wrong side of the road when they arrived at the crash scene, but he's denying that he was driving carelessly. His lawyer says he was in the correct lane, that is, he was on the left coming out of an S-bend, but he saw the oncoming car, which was a Subaru, crossing the line towards him. So he then veered right to try to avoid it. So that's going to be the basis of his defence.
These are serious charges, aren't they? How did Rhys Berger, who was 21 years old, how did he look in court?
Yeah, he looked very solemn and very serious in the dock. He's sort of slightly built, dark-haired young man. And although he's a US citizen, he's actually been studying at University of Melbourne, and he'd flown over on Monday to spend the term break with his girlfriend, and she's a student at Auckland University. So they hired a rental car at Auckland International Airport and they set off, and they were heading for Matori Bay for a holiday when this crash happened, and it was quite late on Monday night, about 11:15.
So, Lois, this isn't a substantive hearing. Evidence has not been considered. The issue that was being addressed this morning really was, should Berger be able to return to Australia while he's awaiting trial?
That's right. It was a bail issue. Of course, he handed his passport in to the police after the crash, and they were a bit opposed to giving it back to him. They said there's been a few cases of people promising to come back to court and then hearing off to Spain and not showing up or whatever. And he's due, of course, to return to the States from Australia in July.
Right.
But the lawyer, Mike Dodds, told the judge there's no way this is going to happen with Rhys Berger. Now, his father was in court today, and he is a US attorney. And he flew across to New Zealand immediately after the crash. And he has signed an affidavit saying he will ensure his son comes back for every court appearance that's scheduled, and either he or his wife will be flying back each time from the States to support him. He said the boy, or the young man, also wants to study law, and he won't be doing anything to jeopardise his future career prospects.
Gosh, this is pretty unusual in every respect. He was so, on the basis of that, the dad and all the evidence that was given, he was granted bail.
That's right. The Judge McDonald said Berger had no previous convictions. He said it could take months to arrange the trial, and even if he were convicted, it's highly unlikely he would go to jail. And he did note the father's affidavit and his son's aspirations to be a lawyer. He said if he didn't come back to New Zealand, we could always extradite him. And, to paraphrase, that wouldn't be a good look for a future lawyer. So Mr Berger has been remanded for a case review hearing on the 18th of May.
Lois Williams, so the police didn't oppose bail per se, just the fact that he was getting his passport and was able to leave the country. 5:23. The Russian ambassador to the UN has blasted Britain at an emergency meeting of the Security Council in New York. Vasily Nebenzia strongly rebuffed Britain's assertion that Moscow is responsible for the nerve agent attack on Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia in Salisbury last month. Just hours earlier, Yulia Skripal put out a statement through the police saying she's getting better every day. That is the daughter. The BBC's James Landale reports on the latest fairly eccentric developments.
It's just over 4 weeks since Sergei and Yulia Skripal were found poisoned by a nerve agent in Salisbury. 4 weeks during which the former Russian intelligence officer and his 33-year-old daughter have lain critically ill, at times in a coma. But today, Ms. Skripal revealed that she at least was on the mend. In a statement issued on her behalf by the police, she said, "I woke up over a week ago now and am glad to say my strength is growing daily. I'm grateful for the interest in me and for the many messages of goodwill that I've received. Today, Russian television broadcast an unverified recording of an alleged phone call between Yulia Skripal and her cousin Victoria. She's hoping to come to Britain to visit Ms. Skripal with the help of Russian diplomats, if British officials are prepared to risk giving her a visa. In London, the Russian ambassador welcomed the news that Ms. Skripal was recovering.
I'm really happy, and I hope that the Sergei Skripal will also recover. And I'm quite sure that one day Yulia will come back to Moscow.
But he once again denied any Russian involvement in the attack. So amid the claims and counterclaims, what is the UK case? Theresa May says the substance used is Novichok, a type of nerve agent developed by Russia. British scientists say this military-grade agent can probably be made only by a nation-state, but they don't say which one. Instead, it is secret intelligence that the government says implicates Russia, a conclusion that has the international support of dozens of countries. But Russia rejects this and says Britain lacks real evidence. It denies ever producing Novichok, but says other countries could have done so. It's requested samples of the substance for testing, and it's called for Russian officials to be involved in a joint investigation. At the United Nations this evening, there were smiles between ambassadors, but not for long, as Russia accused Britain of fabricating intelligence to question the legitimacy of the Russian state.
Couldn't you come up with a better fake story? We all know what the worth of British intelligence information is, based on the experience with Tony Blair. We have told our British colleagues that you're playing with fire, and you will be sorry.
Britain in turn accused Russia of playing fast and loose with international security.
But we cannot ignore what has happened in Salisbury. We cannot ignore Russia turning a blind eye to the use of chemical weapons in Syria and in Salisbury. And we cannot ignore the way that Russia seeks to undermine the international institutions which have kept us safe since the end of the Second World War.
This confrontation between Britain and Russia is not over yet, not by a long chalk.
James Landau reporting there, the language in the UN quite nutty in some instances. We'll have another report more focused on what was going on with the Security Council a bit later in the program. We turn now to roll call at Tato Petera College. Stephanie Pomari here. Finished. Yep, that's roll call done with Hato Petera is a school with just the one student, Stephanie. She's in year 10, that's the fourth form in Old Language, and she's 100% of the student population at the Māori Catholic school. Wagging would be quite difficult for Stephanie. However, after the Commissioner for Hato Petera revealed the school was still receiving $200,000 in operation grants from the Ministry of Education, the Ministry's announced the school's future is up for public consultation. Stephanie's mum says the solution to keeping the school running could be to open up enrolments to more non-Catholic children. Te Mana Korehi, when we say more non-Catholic children, there's none at the moment, so one would be more. Te Mana Korehi reporter John Boynton and cameraman Nick Monroe went to find out more.
It's lunchtime at Hato Petera College, and you'd normally expect to hear the acoustics of students running down school hallways, playing sports and letting off steam. But here, the school grounds are filled with silence. That's because for the past month, the only Catholic co-ed school in New Zealand has a roll of just one student. And that student, 14-year-old Stephanie Pomari, says despite being all on her own, her school day is still relatively normal.
It's like a normal school. I go to my subjects, I learn. They give me everything they can, and they're just so good teachers.
Stephanie does feel pressured to leave the school from both the Catholic Dioceses of Auckland and the Ministry of Education.
It represents my culture a lot, and it makes a stand towards the church that they can't do this to Māori. And it's just wrong.
The college currently has a roster of 4 staff and 1 administrator, which Stephanie says is her main reason for staying at Hato Petera. But she's adamant about the important role the school has in shaping young Māori, with past students including New Zealander of the Year, Dr. Lance O'Sullivan.
Hato Petera College is just like a normal college, and I love this college, and it's the college that gave me and made me what I am today, a fighter.
Yesterday, the Commissioner for the school, Lex Hamill, revealed that despite having a role of just one, the school is still receiving $200,000 of state funding for operation cost. He says the school grounds are in disrepair and the boarding school facilities have been left to fall by the wayside. Stephanie's mother, Phyllis Paumari, says the solution is simple. The Catholic Diocese of Auckland needs to allow more students to enrol at the school.
They need to come to the table because we know what's wrong with this kura. We know how we can improve enrolments, but we're constantly avoiding that kōrero. So I think that's where we need to start. There is hope.
Despite the dire situation, Phyllis Paumari believes there's a chance for it to keep its doors open.
All they need to do is be allowed to enrol new students, and there are new students that wish to come to the school. The only problem is that the diocese will not allow it because they're not Catholic.
A meeting will be held this Sunday, Phyllis Paumari says, where past students will come together to find a way to keep the school open. The Catholic Diocese of Auckland declined to comment for this story. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko John Boynton ahau.
You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. It is 29 to 6 on Friday night. Coming up on the program, a young soldier, he was a young soldier at the time, who carried a young Wahine survivor to safety. Needs your help to track him down 50 years on. Quite an extraordinary story and a vivid description of what it was like to be there. Awful, in short. Frustrated residents on the Kapiti Coast wage a war against Argentine ants. Ants from Argentina.
Yeah, that's them.
Yeah. Go home, you ants.
And they bite too.
Yeah, awful things. And Edgecumbe, 12 months to the day after the floods that really did devastate that little town. We'd love your feedback. Text us 2101. Email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, or you can be in contact via Twitter and Facebook. Here's Anna with the headlines.
Thanks, John. A structural engineer has contradicted Jerry Brownlee's assertions that major damage happened to Christchurch homes after the February 2011 earthquakes. The former EQC minister's claim follows the news that the re-repair bill in the city has climbed to $270 million. Mr Brownlee says first-time repairs were not botched and a lot of damage happened as a result of aftershocks. But structural engineer Colin Ashby says the major damage was experienced in the main event and other damage was cosmetic. Government agencies are giving up on their efforts to eradicate myrtle rust now that it's been found in the South Island for the first time. The Ministry for Primary Industries and the Department of Conservation have confirmed the plant disease has been found in the Tasman region at the top of the South Island, which means it is now established in almost all vulnerable regions. The Human Rights Commissioner and the Privacy Commissioner have asked for more information about an Immigration New Zealand profiling program that critics accuse of being racist and targeting Pacifica people. Over the past 18 months, the agency has piloted data modelling using the age, gender and ethnicity of overstayers to identify groups likely to run up hospital costs or commit crime. The agency rejects claims of racial profiling. And officials from the Southern District Health Board are investigating an outbreak of hepatitis A at a kindergarten in Oamaru. The virus has been found in 3 children from 2 families associated with Edna McCulloch Kindergarten. And a drone has diverted 2 planes and suspended arrivals at Auckland Airport for 30 minutes this afternoon. The drone was spotted by 2 pilots who were attempting to land before they were diverted by air traffic control just before 3 o'clock this afternoon. Steve Moore from the Civil Aviation Authority says the drones are putting people's lives at risk. And that's the news.
About 3 nautical miles from Manukau at roughly 3 p.m. at 1,200 feet. Anyone who knows who had that drone in the air is asked to contact police.
Right, yes.
Anna Thomas, thank you very much. Let's go to business news now with Emile Donovan. And Emile, who's beaming in from Wellington. Nice to have you back with us, Emile. You're going to tell us that Kiwi banks are doing better than Australian banks, but they're the same, aren't they the same thing? Aren't the Kiwi banks owned by Australian banks? And have I just thrown you there, Emile, in terms of that wasn't the question you want to discuss. You don't want to have, you know what, you just want to discuss customer satisfaction, don't you?
No, not at all. Not at all. No, we can go into that. Basically, the Kiwi-owned banks we're talking about here. This is a customer satisfaction survey by Consumer New Zealand. It's of the 7 major banks here. And the top 3 banks in that survey are all locally owned banks. So we've got TSB Bank, they're sitting pretty on top. They're closely followed by the Cooperative Bank. Both of them had more than 80% of the survey customers saying that they're really pretty happy with the services that they're getting. And then in third place, Kiwi Bank picking up the bronze medal. They were a bit further back at just over 70%. But the Aussie banks, John, took a bit of a slamming.
Ah, I see. So this really is the Kiwis beating the Aussies.
Indeed.
Go
yeah,
Emil.
BNZ.
Yeah.
BNZ, they were the best rated of the Aussie banks. They pleased about 65%.
Sorry, I just want to stop you on your tracks there. BNZ were the best rated of the Aussie banks. It's such a it's so beautiful, isn't it? They are BNZ. The BNZ, the Bank of New Zealand, is an Aussie bank, isn't it?
It can get a little confusing from time to time.
Yeah, thanks, Emil. Yeah, okay. And on you go. I'll shut up and you just tell us about the...
Westpac Bank, they were on 55, and ASB and ANZ, there's another one for you, they took the wooden spoon. They were down at 52% customer satisfaction in this survey.
Anyone complaining about the cricket, Emil? Anyone ball tampering? Anyone? None of that?
That might have been a factor, but consumers' feedback really for the reasoning. They said lots of the Aussie banks, and obviously the Aussie banks are very big banks. They have lots of customers, so that naturally factored in. More customers does equal more complaints, but they also said a lot of customers received lots of sort of unsolicited offers of credit cards and insurance policies and things like that, many of which weren't really particularly well suited to the people who were receiving them. So it was kind of a lack of tailoring and a lack of personalisation. And consumers said the feedback that they got was that banks that had a more intimate kind of feel, they had a good kind of personal relationship with their customers, were the ones that did well, and they were the Kiwi ones.
Right, thank you, Emil. Sky TV, I'm just looking at their share price. Boy, oh boy, they've taken a pounding today, haven't they?
Yeah, they have. And look, this is obviously a continuation of some pretty bad times for Sky. Their share price has fallen drastically over the past 3 years, from nearly $7 a few years back to about $2.30 there or thereabouts in recent days. Yesterday alone it fell 6%, though it has recovered a bit today.
Yes, sorry, so that was the fall was yesterday. Boy, that was a big drop in a day, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was a big drop. This, of course, is on the heels of some big movements and some big setbacks for the company. Their merger with Vodafone was denied, of course, dropping subscription numbers, and of course there was the added blow of not being the #1 choice for next year's Rugby World Cup. However, yesterday, RNZ, we were among a select group of media invited to come and talk to some of the company's executives about their future. They are still feeling pretty good about the future. They're confident that they can keep a hold of their seasonal sports rights, which of course are a big cash cow. And they also own the Outside Broadcasting Service. That is a company that produces most live events in New Zealand, concerts and sports matches and things like that. So they are feeling, pretty good about the future. However, that low share price, and the company acknowledged that as much, does open them up to a possible takeover, for example, from an international monolith like Amazon, or maybe even to an adventurous equity fund here. So it does speak to some sort of big time uncertainty about that company's future and where it's going to go.
Yeah, it's a fascinating business. I mean, how did the markets end the week?
Well, the NZX is up very slightly, 29 points. That's 0.35%. It closed at 8,393. And the dollar is steady as she goes, down very slightly against the main currencies. It's buying 72.5 US cents, 94.5 Australian and 51.8 pence.
Emil Donovan, thank you very much and have a great weekend. A young soldier captured holding a young survivor of the Wahine disaster and carrying him to safety has spent the past 50 years wondering what became of that little boy. Chris Wilson was 21 at the time, a soldier who'd been travelling home to Christchurch, having left Waiuru the morning of the disaster, and then found himself on Seatoon Wharf helping pull survivors from the freezing water. That wasn't all he did that day. Next Tuesday will mark 50 years since the disaster in which 51 passengers and crew drowned. Chris, who was supposed to be a passenger on the Wahine, Wahine himself that fateful day, says as the anniversary approaches, he's always wondered what became of the little shocked and bewildered boy he carried to safety.
At one stage, one of the lifeboats off the Wahine came ashore right by the wharf, and it was there that the photo that I was in was taken, and I was handed a little boy, and as we talked about, and I just walked him across to the bus that was waiting, and the buses were taking the survivors to, I believe, to the Wellington railway station where they were being processed, and I assume and hope that this little boy was reunited with his parents.
So he seemed to be with no one when he came off the lifeboat?
No, there was no mother or father sort of saying, "Oh, that's my kid," so once again, you know, what is the backstory to his being united with me for that brief time?
And he never spoke the entire time you held him, as you carried him from the lifeboat to the bus. He never spoke.
No, I offered words of comfort, but he just sort of was looking around, which, you know, makes me, you know, think that he was, you know, well, he obviously had parents somewhere, but he was bewildered, poor fellow.
How old do you reckon he was?
Oh, I reckon he was five to seven. Yeah.
Unbelievably terrifying experience he'd been through, and what makes
dreadful.
And what makes it potentially even more dreadful, although we won't know until you find out who this little guy was, and he will now be, you know, in his mid-50s, is that you also helped get bodies to the makeshift morgue that had been set up that day, and there is a terrible potential that the people he was with, or the person he was with, may have been lost.
Could have been. Yes. We went once the action at Seaton Wharf had died down. We went back into town and you know, carried on our drinking as you do when you're 21. And then we thought, well, maybe we could go around to the other side of the harbour. And so somebody said, well, look, you know, the trucks are coming in from the other side of the harbour with the bodies on. You could go back on one of the trucks. And so we went to the morgue and waited for the first truck to arrive, and it backed in, and the driver got out and lowered the tailgate, and there was a sight I never hope to see again, but, you know, it's people before me have said death isn't pretty, and these bodies were not laid out nicely. So we said to the guy, "Where are you going?" And he said, "I'm off home." So we couldn't get a ride round to the other side. So there was a grizzled sergeant from the police was there with a young police cadet. And he said, "Well, would you guys help us?" And so the six of us untangled the bodies, rolled them to the end of the tailgate and put them on a gurney, and wheeled them into the morgue where the nurses and doctors were, and they basically just cut their clothes off around the chest area, certified them dead, and then they wheeled them into the morgue proper, which we didn't get involved in. So that was the first time I'd seen a dead body, and I got really upset when I saw one of the young stewards that had drowned, and a guy my own age, and that wasn't a very pleasant moment. That's something I think of many, many times. I can remember, in my own mind, I can still remember one old lady and this young steward off the ship. Yeah, so it's a day to remember.
Any more details about that little guy you remember? He wasn't by any chance in a school uniform, or he didn't have red hair or different coloured eyes, or any of those kind of striking details? None of that stuff? No,
it was just a little boy that is in the picture, which I hope that is going to be on display during the celebrations or the commemorations in Wellington next week.
Would you let us know if you hear from him, Chris?
Oh, I certainly would. I certainly would, because I've got a short list of people, and I've followed 2 dead trails. And I've found a school teacher who believes she recognises him, but his family have said, no, it's not him. But I have my doubts about that, and I'm going to revisit that. But if anybody else thinks it's their brother or their son, I'd certainly welcome being able to have a chat to him and just finding out, what's happened in 50 years to your life.
Chris Wilson, quite an extraordinary story, isn't it? The photo is on our Facebook page. Of course, it was also on screen as that interview was playing out. If you do recognise that boy or think you do contact us. Email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, and we will pass your details on to Chris. It's 12 months to the day that the flooded Rangataiki River breached stop banks next to the town of Edgecumbe and went through Edgecumbe. The resulting inundation of parts of the Eastern Bay of Plenty town saw 1,600 people evacuated and a number of homes severely damaged and uninhabitable, water through shops, you name it. Our Waikato Bay of Plenty reporter Andrew McRae and visual journalist Dan Cook have been in Edgecumbe to see how people are coping 1 year on.
It was like a river. It was just flowing so far. The current was so strong.
What's happened over here?
Over here, well, I think
Neighbour.
Yeah, the neighbour's house. Well, nothing actually. You know, the water's come through here and knocked the house. It started off with just a smaller hole, but as times, because of the year, the times got on, the hole, every time it rained, it just got bigger and bigger. So it's just eaten away underneath the house.
Maisie Natana, who got back into her home in October. But her neighbours have not been so lucky. Their place is one of 78 still lying empty. 212 homes have been repaired and people are back living in them. Renovations to Jill Delamere's home have stalled, meaning her whānau still lives with friends in a 3-bedroom home, now housing 8 people.
It's been a huge emotional roller coaster. We still don't have a date. We think maybe a few more months, but what's a few more months? For us, it's like us personally, it has been really frustrating. But we've just been trying to find things to do.
Jenny Thompson's lived in Edgecumbe for 40 years. Ironically, she and her husband had just done up their home prior to the flood. She first went back into her house to collect personal items 5 days later, and while the water had receded, the mess from metre-high water through the house was soul-destroying.
I kept talking to myself and saying to myself, just keep focused, get what you need. Don't let it affect you too much, because as I was going around the house, I just had this list and I knew that that's what we had to get out.
Jenny stayed at a hopi before moving home on March the 3rd, but during that time commuted back to Edgecumbe each day for work at the local primary school, something she found very stressful.
I think one of the things was a real blessing for us was the fact that we were over at a hopi and had lots of walks on the beach, and that really helped, with the stress levels and being able to walk away at times when it was getting too much.
It's been 12 months since the Rangataiki River breached its stop banks just behind me and the water flowed into the streets. Memories of that day remain vivid in the minds of the local residents. Many only had seconds to flee their homes and with very few personal possessions.
Sherelle Stevenson, who heads the local community board, says remedial work was slow to start, but a lot has been done in the last 3 months.
If you look around here today, it really is quite a different scene from, well, you couldn't even get in here a year ago today, and in fact it's quite a different scene from perhaps 3 months ago. We've seen a lot of work's been done in what we call the red zone area in the last 3 months, so for the community that's been welcomed, because it has been a constant reminder of what happened 12 months ago.
90% of Edgecumbe Primary School's community was affected and had to leave their homes. Trauma support and counselling for staff and students was provided, something Principal Kahu Walker says was extremely helpful.
Immediately after the last 2 terms of the year were particularly tough, it had been a tough year. Tired children that were really hitting the wall, very little resources that were around. To this year, we still have an effect if it rains. If there's a storm coming, children are still pretty anxious about, what could happen. We still have surface flooding around the school because of the drainage system underground is still needing to be addressed. And those are just triggers and reminders to children just how fragile the situation can be.
People in 24 damaged homes who had no insurance have been able to get back home thanks to the Livable Homes project, initiated by the Whakatane District Council. Marion Hopkinson was one of the lucky ones.
I'd let my
insurance lapse because of, you know, circumstances of the time, and I was in the middle of getting it again, but yeah, and they came along and helped me, and I wouldn't have known where to go.
Edgecumbe's a vibrant and resilient community, according to Jill Delamere, and one used to adversity, such as the earthquake in 1987 and floods in 2004.
There are a lot of talkers and there are a lot of doers. There are a lot of talkers. If they don't know how to proceed with things, they'll find someone to support them. Yeah, no, it isn't actually a really good community to live in. I mean, I'm still here. Yeah.
Maisie Natana says some people are still angry because they believe there are still unanswered questions.
Why it happened, yeah, and who's to pay? You know, we've had to use our insurance, but that was really good. But you know, some people weren't insured, and you know, it's made it hard for them. But I think, yeah, it's just a long process.
Community Board Chair Cheryl Stevenson believes the general feeling in Edgecumbe is one of hope.
They are trying to look forward and move on. I do understand that there is a segment of the community who have found that quite hard and are engaging in class action and things like that, but if I was to say generally speaking, I feel as though that we're moving in the right direction.
To help build up community spirit, Edgecumbe's staging a fun day tomorrow to bring together the town of about 2,000 people. For Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
9 minutes to 6, let's go across the Tasman. It's been a busy day and a busy night lies ahead for New Zealand athletes at the Commonwealth Games on the Gold Coast. Netball, boxing, hockey have all been going on. Joining us now from the Gold Coast is our sports editor, Stephen Hewson, who I believe, Stephen, is standing on Broadbeach. Is that Broadbeach you're on?
Not quite. Well, yeah, Broadbeach is about 2 blocks away, John. This is the pond behind the main press centre.
Right. Okay.
But it looks very nice.
It's a shimmering pond.
Actually, no, that's a bit harsh. It's one of the canals actually that's obviously flow off from Broadbeach. Yeah. So a pond. I was possibly being a wee bit harsh.
Okay, a Sylvania Waters Canal. Thanks, bro. Hey, what's been happening today?
Yeah, well, it's been pretty busy. We've had, as you mentioned, a bit of hockey. The Black Sticks men, they had a 6-2 win. We've had some boxing. David Nika, gold medalist at Glasgow 4 years ago. He had his first bout in the 91 kilogram division. Easy win for him over his opponent from Antigua and Barbuda, and he is obviously advancing on and looking to secure another gold medal. Who else have we had going? We've had the cyclists. Well, not so well there this time for them. Obviously last night picking up the gold and 2 silver, but Natasha Hansen's through to the semi-finals of the individual sprint for the women's. Later on tonight we've got the men's individual pursuit. We've got the men's Kieran, which I don't know if you're aware, is the one where they follow the motorbike around on the velodrome for a bit. We've got 2 of the gold medalists from last night, Sam Webster and Annie Dawkins, competing in the early rounds of that. So while hopes of more medals at the velodrome, we've moved on to the individual program rather than the teams program, and that's not quite the same strength for New Zealand as we saw last night in the teams program.
Yeah, that was wonderful, wasn't it?
It was indeed. Netball, the Silver Ferns. Yeah, but they had something like 77-44 or 70-44 win over Wales today, but they were only up by 5 points at half time, and the second quarter was very ragged, and so it's not quite as convincing as that score might suggest. So they had the 10-point or so win over Uganda in the first round. They've still got a lot of work to do if they're to be gold or even silver medal contenders.
Yeah, they do. Although I wonder if they're galvanised by being up against their, their strongest opposition. I thought one of the highlights of the games for me so far is watching that Uganda team play. I don't think I've ever seen them before, and I thought they were, for a country that I didn't realise was any kind of netball power, I thought they were pretty useful actually on the court. What's happening over the weekend, Stephen?
Yeah, well, maybe if we just touch too on just a little bit later on tonight, we've got some swimmers. I should have given you a mention for them. We've got 7 swimmers into finals, including Daniel Hunter and Sam Perry in the 50 metres butterfly, Bradley Ashby in the 400 metres individual medley. So seven finals there for the swimmers. Over the weekend, Sophie Pascoe and Tom Walsh, they're the big names to look out for. Sophie Pascoe, of course, is in 2 events. She goes into the first of hers is the 200-metre individual medley. She's the world record holder in that event, so she's got that up tomorrow, and there will be a final on that tomorrow night. So she has 1 heat, presumably the world record holder. You can pretty much assume she's going to be in the final, and hopefully another gold medal tomorrow night. Tom Walsh, he's into qualifying on Sunday for the shot put, obviously the world champion. He won silver in Glasgow 4 years ago, and earlier today I asked him just how different he is now to then.
It was very green in Glasgow, mate. That was my first games, and yeah, I was a different character back then. I kind of was very new to the world of shot put. I had a very good start to the year in 2014, was getting my first ever World Championship medal indoors, and I just didn't really know a lot, mate. You know, I was 22, quite young, but you know, still loved throwing shot, and nothing's changed in terms of that. I still love throwing shot. I still love the chase of that perfect throw. I probably have a lot more confidence now than what I did back then, but I think me as a guy hasn't changed a lot apart from the confidence and understanding what I need to do to be in that world-class shape on a more constant basis, and I think that's what I've been doing over the last, especially over the last 2 years. You know, I haven't had any bad results or any bad throws really in competitions. So it's just, you know, time out in the middle, mate. It's a good cricket term, isn't it? That and just understanding what I need to do to get into the right shape.
Because you're the rock star of this team now, aren't you?
I don't know about that. I think Dame Villa-Adams is still the rock star. You know, you can't take that away from her. And we've still got obviously Nick Willis, who's a legend still, and Eliza as well, who both me and her are the young and up and coming ones. So
it must feel a bit different though, does it? I mean, given what you've done over the last year or two.
Yeah. Well, I got a text from Val actually after I won World Indoors, and she goes, "Well done. You've only got another 3 World Indoor titles to go." 2 Olympic golds and 3 world champs. So good luck. So no, she's definitely captain. She's a gun. What she's done for athletics and what she's done for shot put in New Zealand is huge.
Does she put you in line every now and then? Does she?
Oh yeah, you know her. You know, yeah. You can't, if you step out of line with her, you definitely know about it. But me and Val have a great relationship, and I think for some reason I give her the most shit out of anyone and tend to get away with it the most.
Now, you often have a few bets with your coach. What are some of the ones you've had a few?
Dale, we've had a bunch over the years actually. Before even we started a coach-athlete relationship, we trained together a little bit. So you know, he had to throw in a G-string one day. He's also a bit short on hair on the top, so he had to grow his hair out for a year. He's got the mutton chops on at the moment because he lost a bet indoors. I've got a tattoo on my foot. And
what did you have to get? What tattoo?
Oh, it's just something between me and Dale, mate. All it had to be visible and barbecue attire. So if you see me with jandals on, you'll see it. Yeah, so look, it just brings a bit of fun, you know. Like major championships are why we do it, but sometimes they can become really serious, and the bet kind of makes it a little bit more lighthearted. You know, that's why I was so excited about my last round throw indoors, because I PB'd and I needed to PB and win for him to grow the mutton chops. So I wasn't excited that I PB'd and won. I was excited that he had to grow mutton chops in the next 9 months.
And for the Gold Coast?
We haven't come to it yet. It'll be a discussion today and tomorrow. Usually they are set like on the last day, and we come to an agreement. It's pretty easy usually, but there'll be something.
Tom Walsh talking to Stephen Hewson. Hockey, swimming, boxing, New Zealand athletes. There's been plenty of action for New Zealand. In fact, we'll come back to the Commonwealth Games later. In London, local politicians and the police have been struggling to explain a continuing rise in knife and gun deaths across the city. Since the beginning of the year, more than 50 people have been killed in London. A lot of media coverage of this. The BBC's Dominic Kashiani reports.
Last night's 2 deaths brought the number of killings in the capital so far this year to more than 50, up more than a quarter on the same period of 2017. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who's been criticised by some in his own party for not doing enough to keep the city safe, turned his fire on ministers.
And it's really important that we appreciate there has been a massive surge in knife crime and gun crime. That's why 6 weeks ago I wrote to the Prime Minister, asked for a meeting, because this is a national problem that demands national solutions. I call upon her again to meet with me to discuss these problems.
The Metropolitan Police, which has also been accused of losing control of the drugs market, has now created a task force of 120 officers. Deputy Assistant Commissioner Graham McNulty promised it would make a difference.
It will be dedicated to violent crime so that we can put it in the areas where we've got most crime and that they can use every tactic available to them to identify those individuals who are causing violence. If we're taking violent people out of communities and off the street, that has to be a really good thing.
Beyond London, recorded knife crime reached more than 37,000 incidents across all of England and Wales in the year to last September, the highest it's been for 6 years. With ministers under pressure to act, next week the government will unveil a plan to intervene much earlier in the lives of young people who are most at risk of becoming involved in violence.
That report from the BBC in London, taking us up to the pips.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. A structural engineer has contradicted Jerry Brownlee's claim that repairs to quake-damaged homes in Christchurch have had to be redone because of subsequent quakes. The former EQC minister made the comment in response to news the re-repair bill for homes in the city has climbed to $270 million. Mr Brownlee says it is wrong to say first-time repairs were botched and that a lot of damage happened after initial repairs had been carried out. But structural engineer Colin Ashby doesn't agree.
Relatively minor. You'd get a crack that would have been repaired and it will have opened up again or something like that. Generally, there may have been a little bit of settlement, but nothing like the major earthquakes caused. Generally, it's more cosmetic than anything.
Structural engineer Colin Ashby. Health officials are investigating an outbreak of hepatitis A at a kindergarten in Oamaru. The virus has been detected in 3 children from 2 families at the Edna McCulloch kindergarten. Hepatitis A is a virus acquired by eating contaminated food or water and can be spread through close contact with an infected person. Symptoms include sudden tiredness and fever, nausea and abdominal pain, followed by jaundice. The DHB's Medical Officer of Health, Keith Reid, says it's working with the kindergarten to establish if any other families might be affected.
We're doing some blood testing to determine whether there are further cases in the kindergarten community. And then, as a control measure, we're going to offer vaccination to those who are not immune. Depending on the results of the blood testing, we may find some further cases, in which case we'll be doing further investigation of the affected families.
Keith Reid of the Southern DHB. Health Ministry officials have warned that District Health Board deficits could hit $225 million this year. Deficits are already forecast to reach $189 million by July, and a nurses' settlement would push them higher. Our health correspondent Karen Brown reports.
New DHB financial results reveal that for the 8 months to the end of February, DHB's had a combined deficit of $73 million. That's $27 million worse than they budgeted for and $61 million higher than the previous year. Their forecast year-end deficit was $189 million. Health officials estimated this would grow to $209 million by June 30, adding it would hit $225 million if nurses accepted a new pay offer, which they rejected late last month. The Health Minister David Clark said the size of the deficits comes as no surprise, given systematic underfunding of health by the previous government. Call Karen Brown Tene.
A drone has diverted 2 planes and suspended arrivals at Auckland Airport for 30 minutes this afternoon. The drone was spotted by 2 pilots attempting to land before they were diverted by air traffic control just before 3 this afternoon. Steve Moore from the Civil Aviation Authority says those flying the drones are putting people's lives at risk and need to be identified before anything catastrophic happens. He says 7 other aircraft were also held at the airport while the area was cleared. The future of Hatopetera College will be decided after a month-long consultation. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, says it's been agreed to start talks on the possible closure of the school. Here's Te Manu Korihi reporter Shannon Haunui-Thompson.
RNZ News has revealed that Hato Petera, which has only one student, still gets a $200,000 operations grant from the Ministry of Education. Year 10 pupil Stephanie Pomare is the only student at the college on Auckland's North Shore, and she is refusing to leave. She and her whānau believe the Māori Catholic school plays an important role for Māori students. Earlier this year, a commissioner was appointed to take over the governance of the college. Chris Hipkins says the commissioner supports the decision to discuss the school's future. The consultation process will run until May the 14th. Ko Shannon Honui-Thompson, aho.
The head of the University of Otago's law school, Mark Hannigan, is stepping down. This comes only a month after concerns were raised about a summer law camp for second-year students, with complaints about past camps involving excessive drinking, nudity and jelly wrestling. This year's camp was subsequently cancelled. A University of Otago spokesperson confirmed Professor Hannigan was stepping down as Dean, although he would continue to work at the university until the end of the year when he's moving to Auckland. In an email to staff, Professor Hannigan says this is the appropriate time to step down. The spokesperson would not say if Professor Hannigan's decision had anything to do with the public backlash over the summer camps. It's 6:05. New Zealand shot put star Tom Walsh is the strong favourite to win gold at the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games, but the current world champion remains bullish about his chances. Walsh is the holder of what most pundits consider the clean world record. He could claim gold if he throws to even 80% of his potential, and he says putting money on him would be wise.
I'm not that big a favourite. I'm still paying $1.10 on the TAB, mate.
It's as low as it gets, just about.
I know I need to take care of business, mate. I built my career on over the last 3 or 4 years is going to whatever comp it is and throwing as far as I'm actually should throw. If I do that, no one's going to be close to me for sure.
Tom Walsh shot put qualifying starts on Sunday. Tiger Woods has fired a 1 over par 73 to tie for 29th after round 1 of the Masters, and despite the average start, he says he's simply delighted to be back after missing the last 3 years due to a back problem.
I felt great to be back out there again. You know, I've only come up here the last couple of years just to have food, so it's nice to get out here and play and know that I had this golf course in front of me. You know, and if I clean up the par 5s, you know, I'm right up that board.
Tiger Woods, meanwhile, defending champion Sergio Garcia put 5 in the water on the 15th to card a 13 on that hole. He equalled the worst score for a hole in the tournament's history, carding a 9 over par 81. And that's the news.
Tomorrow morning, journalist Simon Wilson, who's turned his observational eye on his own cancer. Editor and writer Alan Taylor became a friend and confidant of fellow Scot, the late Muriel Spark. By no means the difficult recluse some have portrayed. And Miranda Manasiades has based her new Winter Solstice production on the story of Icarus. Good luck with finding some sun then. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning after 8 here on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Fine breaks and isolated showers. Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine but cloudy periods and a few showers spreading north tomorrow. Clearing in Wairarapa later. Waitomo to Wellington, including the central high country. Also Nelson and Marlborough. Mainly fine. A few showers tomorrow morning and afternoon. For Buller, a few showers turning to rain this evening, then clearing tomorrow morning. Westland and Fiordland, rain spreading north, followed by a few showers, but they should clear by tomorrow as well. For Canterbury, cloud increasing, scattered rain spreading from the south this evening, clearing tomorrow. For Southland and Otago, rain with heavy fall spreading north, followed by a few showers tonight, but they should clear tomorrow afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, fine weather, but it will turn to a few showers tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomason. It's been wonderful having you with us this week.
Thank you. It's been great being here.
Thanks, Anna. Last night, Checkpoint broke the news that the cost of re-repairs on quake-damaged homes in Christchurch has climbed to $250 million. That's more than 4 times what the former EQC Minister Jerry Brownlee predicted it would be just 2 years ago in 2016. The cost blowout has taken everybody by surprise, including the current EQC Minister Megan Woods, who was asked who's asked Treasury for urgent advice on what the final figure could end up being. Now, we wanted to ask Jerry Brownlee how it was that costs grew this high under his watch, but he's repeatedly refused to be interviewed by me, not once in the 2 and a bit years I've been doing Checkpoint. This morning on Morning Report, he said it was incorrect to refer to EQC having managed botched repairs in the city. He said a lot of the damage to homes happened after initial assessments were carried out as a result of the thousands of aftershocks that followed the February 2011 quake, although major quakes were treated as new insurance events. Mr. Brownlee refuted suggestions from Megan Woods that the government had walked away from Christchurch at a time when the number of re-repairs was growing, and he said the number of callbacks EQC received for work to be looked at again, which currently stands at about 20%, was standard when compared to callbacks on new homes. Colin Young put some of these assertions to experts working on the residential rebuilds.
This morning, after refusing 5 interview requests to appear on Checkpoint and 1 to appear on Morning Report, the former Earthquake Recovery Minister, Jerry Brownlee, fronted up.
We had thousands of earthquakes, many hundreds, over 3.5 on the Richter scale, which is a sort of a damage point. And as we've gone through the years, it's not surprising that perhaps some work that was done in the first place may need to be done again. To say it's botched is wrong.
Colin Ashby runs a structural engineering firm and has been assessing damage to houses in Christchurch for EQC and individual homeowners since September 2010. He says the major damage occurred in the September or February quakes, not, as Mr Brownlee asserts, during the aftershocks. The structural engineer says the post-February aftershocks resulted in some floor levels being thrown out of whack by as much as 10 millimetres, but not the major subsidence experienced in the main event.
Relatively minor. You'd get a crack that would have been repaired and it will have opened up again or something like that. Generally, there may have been a little bit of settlement, but nothing like the major earthquakes caused. Generally, it's more cosmetic than anything.
Colin Ashby makes the point that homes repaired under EQC's watch should have been better able to withstand the thousands of aftershocks than before the earthquakes. He says 20% of his work now involves going back to inspect botched EQC repairs. He says the problems often started at the point where inspections were carried out.
The number one problem was that when they did the repairs, that they didn't bother taking levels first often. They'd come in and sort of eyeball it and then go around and putty up the cracks and give it a coat of paint and, she'll be Jake. But, if the principle is you've got to get the foundation right before you do anything else, and often that wasn't done.
Earthquake claims lawyer Peter Woods says blaming second-time repairs on aftershocks rather than botched repairs is an outrageous statement for Mr Brownlee to make.
EQC knows that the work has been botched. They know that the assessments were inadequate and they know that the work was botched. And to say, it was actually subsequent damage is far-fetched.
This morning, Jerry Brownlee said he found suggestions from Megan Woods that the government had cut and run on Christchurch exceptionally hurtful and insisted the government never walked away from the city.
I'm not a sort of person that gets very emotional about politics, but that is a scurrilous and unreasonable assertion from Megan Woods. And I find that as someone who lives in Canterbury, lived through the earthquakes alongside everybody down here, and knows full well, in a very personal way, how that can affect you. That is a disgraceful thing for her to say.
Ms Woods was referring to a downsizing of the EQC Christchurch office in 2016 by a third, from close to 400 staff to just under 300. Lawyer John Goddard worked on the government-funded residential advisory service, handing out free legal advice to claimants for 3 years until 2016. He was surprised in 2016 when EQC announced it was scaling back its operations in the city, given how busy the service was at that time.
There was just a continual stream of new people wanting assistance. We were surprised that there was such a demand, and in fact the governance group was trying to wind down the service, but it just couldn't because the demand was so strong.
He says EQC's customers were coming forward with a whole new series of issues for it to deal with.
The most common problem was where there had been a cosmetic fix, but actually the floor levels were out, or there were issues to do with the foundation. And often what had happened is that a loss adjuster had gone through in the first instance and decided there was no need to involve any structural engineers.
John Goddard says at the time EQC announced it was reducing its staff by a third, people were already waiting 6 to 18 months to get repairs sorted, due mostly to a lack of staff.
I think what was behind it was that a large proportion of EQC's costs were staff costs and business management costs, and so it was a desire to keep those costs in check.
So what if Mr Brownlee's claim the callback rate for EQC managed repairs was about the same for new housing builds?
If you look at the total cost of the EQC repair program down here, and then you look at what percentage that represents on a callback basis, and then compare that to callbacks on a brand new build in any subdivision anywhere in New Zealand, and it's still very low.
The General Manager of Quantity Surveying Business, ASQS, Lester Bryant, says the 20% of callbacks so far on the 67,000 repairs managed by EQC is far above anything seen in the new home building sector.
I'm unaware of a standard that's been set or reported on as a 20% callback, because that would mean that 1 in 5 jobs would be a repeat job by a builder, and builders simply don't cost for that kind of contingency. It would be ridiculous. So I think Mr Brownlee would have to qualify where he got a statement like that from. Certainly totally unaware of any industry information that's ever said anything like that.
Earthquake claims lawyer Peter Woods says Mr Brownlee's claims on callbacks do not stack up.
I think it's appalling that 20% of the homes have had to be repaired or perhaps repaired, and we know that there's thousands more out there that haven't been sorted out yet.
Peter Woods says it appears there was a drive for cost-cutting at EQC and for doing assessments and repairs as cheaply and once over lightly as possible. In Ōtautahi for Checkpoint, ko Conan Young tēnei.
From Canterbury to Taranaki, where the government wants to turn the region into a global tourism hotspot, announcing a $20 million growth package for the region today. Named the second best region in the world to visit by Lonely Planet last year, Regional Development Minister Shane Jones is putting more than half of the money into creating a trek around Mount Taranaki. Our reporter in the region, the excellent Robin Martin, was at the announcement in New Plymouth today.
The Tapawairoa Make Way for Taranaki strategy is heavy on rhetoric about transitioning from an oil and gas and dairy-led economy to one dominated by technology, clean energy and future foods businesses. But the bulk of the investment has gone into tourism.
Taranaki has had a primrose path in black gold and white gold. All Kiwis know that. Now, all the government is doing here is putting some enabling money into infrastructure that over time will boost the prospects of tourism.
The chair of Te Runanga o Ngāti Maru Trust, Jamie Tuta, says iwi recognise there is huge potential for tourism in Taranaki.
What today does is provides, it catalyses, if you like, the beginnings of the investment that needs to be made. And I think, fundamentally it requires a shift in mindset in terms of some focus on tourism and how we can really get the visitor economy moving here in Taranaki.
Mr Tuta says iwi are confident they can leverage off the maunga to create high-value businesses and jobs. The 41-kilometre Taranaki crossing experience will include a series of one-day walks which will traverse Egmont National Park before descending to the Tasman Sea at Oakura. Mr Jones says the crossing will increase the time visitors spend in the region and unlock Taranaki's tourism potential. But he says he would not have backed the idea if Taranaki's 8 iwi had not been behind the concept.
I didn't feel confident about advancing the kaupapa of Taranaki crossing unless the tangata whenua were integrally involved. Because if they're not, I can just see a big bloody headache, to be honest with you.
They are, though, aren't they?
Yeah, and they've promised me this morning that their involvement is credible and their involvement is not forced, it's voluntary.
The next largest investment is $5 million towards the $15 million restoration and development of the earthquake-prone Taranaki Cathedral. Mr Jones says the cathedral, built in 1846, could become a tourism attraction that will showcase the sometimes turbulent story of European settlement in Taranaki. But not everybody was thrilled with the investments announced today. Plant and platforms consultant Steve Blackman walked out when the funding for the cathedral was announced. Mr Blackman says funding the cathedral's restoration didn't fit in the strategy and the church should pay for the work itself. Massey University Business Development Officer for Taranaki, Eve Kawana-Brown, says she's disappointed at the $175,000 earmarked for future foods opportunities.
I can only imagine that those are around initial feasibility, and then there's an application made for actual tranches of funding for new enterprise, new initiatives, because those are just tiny drops in the bucket really of what would be needed to actually do anything, I think.
Other investments announced today include $400,000 to investigate upgrading State Highway 43, or the Forgotten Highway, which links Taranaki to the central North Island, and seed funding for energy and forestry projects and a stocktake of Māori enterprises. I ngā mutu mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Robin Martinaho.
The Justice Minister has weighed in on controversy over Immigration New Zealand's profiling program. RNZ revealed this week that Immigration New Zealand has been running a pilot data modelling program in the last 18 months targeting overstays. It's been using age, gender and ethnicity of overstays to identify groups likely to run up hospital costs or commit crime and to prioritise deportations. The agency says all deportation decisions are lawful and rejects claims of racial profiling. Tom Furley reports.
The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, says he was surprised to hear about the pilot program. He questions whether what he calls the magic and wizardry of computer software will work, but says it should have had ministerial blessing. Mr Little says he'd be concerned with anything that is discriminatory.
I've simply said to my colleague Ian Les-Galloway that from Justice's point of view, we would have an interest in any government program that looks like it is using data in a way that wasn't intended and that might lead to discriminatory or prejudicial outcomes. He's certainly totally alert to that, and when he has his briefing, that'll be questions that he'll be raising.
Critics have called the program racial profiling and say it targets certain nationalities. The co-director of the Centre of Social Data Analytics at AUT, Rima Vaitianathan, says she never includes race in data predictors.
It will racially profile people. It is racially profiling people. If two people are identical in all other characteristics, if they're the same age, the same sex, and have the same sort of immigration application, if a person comes from those targeted countries that they're using in their model, it will bump them up to a higher priority.
When asked whether it breaches human rights and privacy laws, Andrew Little said it was too difficult to say without all the details.
But our laws are pretty clear about not discriminating. There are prohibitions against discrimination. And I think when you set up computer programs that basically make arbitrary decisions based on data that it is fed, then you do have to look very carefully at what is happening and decisions that are resulting from it.
Andrew Little also says there are questions around the role of algorithms in forming government decisions on individuals. However, Immigration New Zealand says the program doesn't include any algorithms at all. With a new privacy law currently before Parliament, he says it's important to keep up with recent developments.
We had to get that bill in because our current privacy laws are falling further and further behind. But I've made it pretty clear that if there are new issues that the bill doesn't cover, then we ought to work pretty hard to make sure that the new law, when it does finally get passed in a few months' time, does cover that.
Immigration New Zealand has rejected racism claims and says all decisions on deportations are lawfully done by warranted immigration officers using a range of sources. The Minister, Ian Les-Galloway, who learned of the pilot program from RNZ yesterday, called for an urgent brief by officials today. However, that's now been moved to Monday. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
A teenager who lit more than 30 fires in Piha last year told police he got an adrenaline rush when he saw emergency services arriving to fight them. Corey Marson-Wood, who's now 20, was sentenced to 3 years in prison in the High Court in Auckland today. Our reporter Rowan Quinn was there and I asked her what more was found out about the fires. It really rattled the Piha community on Auckland's famous West Coast.
Yeah, if you remember at the time, John, it was quite big news then. People were sort of wondering what's going to happen next. At the time, he was a mystery arsonist and fires were happening every few days. People were really worried that someone was going to get hurt. It turns out that we found out he lit about 30 fires, even though he's only charged with 5 counts. Some of those were all at once. Like one incident, he lit 16 fires along a bush track. Another quite well-known one was the local takeaway store that was destroyed, and then a bushfire was sparked that required monsoon buckets, to put it out. And the court said, though, the one that it viewed the most seriously was the only one that didn't happen in Piha. It happened in the city centre near where he worked. And he went to the Viaduct Event Centre, he lit a fire in a recycling bin, but that was next to gas canisters, and there were 900 people in the building at a function at the time. So Justice Peters said, of course, that could have been fatal, and that's why she regarded that one as the most serious. We heard from the Crown that Marsonwood got a thrill at seeing the response to these fires and seeing the emergency services, the fire brigades, the sirens, rushing to the scene.
So the thrill was one of the issues. What was behind this behaviour?
Oh, he's a very complicated guy. He's not, his defence team says psychiatrists have found he's not what you would call a pyromaniac, but he does have a number of other issues. He suffers or was affected by autism, by attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, by obsessive compulsive disorder, and all of these add to a lack of impulse control. So even though he was 19 at the time, the court heard that he had the psychological age of a 15 or 16-year-old boy, which, they're well known for not exactly thinking before they act, and the judge said that she did take that into account. The Crown, however, said that he was smoking a lot of cannabis at the time, and he said to the police, I was on weed 100% when I lit those fires. And so the Crown says, that's on him. He has to take some of the responsibility of his behaviour and the lack of impulse control he got from smoking cannabis. They also say that in terms of that Viaduct fire in the recycling bin, he actually sort of recce'd the bin for a few days beforehand. So even though the defence team says there was no great element of premeditation, the Crown's saying, well, he was looking at this. We know he was at least thinking about it for a few days. So he was sentenced to 3 years, as you said there, but the Justice Peters did acknowledge that that was a big call. The Crown had wanted to send him to jail for 5 years, but she said that a lengthy stint in prison could be very damaging to a young person, let alone one with personality problems and other issues like Marsonwood. So that 3 years is actually a slightly reduced sentence, taking all of that into account.
Rowan Quinn. Frustrated residents on the Kapiti Coast are waging a war against Argentina or Argentine ants. They don't care what you call them because they don't understand. The ants, which are light brown in colour, have been plaguing the Raumati community for a couple of years, but the warmer weather has brought them out in force this year. Jonathan Mitchell went to investigate.
It didn't take long to find them moving quickly along fences and gardens, and even on Poplar Avenue resident Jenny Scott from the Raumati South Residents Association.
You've got one crawling on your glasses. Oh, it's right on your glasses. Oh, it's gone now.
We're so used to that. I mean, we've permanently lived with ants crawling on our skin or on our hair. It's just, we've become used to it. It's difficult. You can't sit outside and have a barbecue. You can't put the baby down on the grass. They just run all over your hands and up your arms every time you pull out a weed or you dig a hole for a plant. It's just not pleasant. And then, of course, they come inside. I had them in my dishwasher, in cupboards, just everywhere.
The ants are an invasive pest that can bite and reproduce at a fast rate. There are dominant species that are aggressive towards normal ants and other species. Another member of the association, Phil Simmons, who's lived in the area for nearly 40 years, says it's the worst it's ever been.
They come in looking for things, and there's a trail, a very noticeable trail, around the room, into cupboards, yeah.
It sounds like you're really frustrated.
Yeah, I'm frustrated. This is definitely war. It's a very...
You're serious?
It's a peaceful place around here, people get on, nothing much happens, but this has kind of changed the dynamic. Yeah, now we have a common enemy.
Another resident, Jane Perry, says it's becoming a real nuisance.
When there's ants around, you continually apologising for the ants. It's like, sorry, excuse the ants. We're trying to stop it spreading to other areas, but if they're getting in your cars and on your person and you go to someone else's, you're taking them with you inadvertently.
The Residents Association has been turned down for funding by the Kapiti Coast District Council to run a bait program, but they're soldiering on anyway. They're spending about $100 towards getting this weekend's bait program sorted. Dorothy Thompson says there will be a group out in force with one mission: to kill.
Even batches that people aren't, we're going to target ones. If there's no one there, we're going to target those places as well, because we just want en masse slaughter of them. Although I feel guilty killing an ant because they're such an industrious little critter, but you know, yes, something's got to go and they have to.
Jenny Scott says despite it being a frustrating experience, it's brought the community together.
Oh, I'll be so relieved when it's over. It's been a lot of hard work. But the response has been amazing, and it's been so good meeting people. I hadn't met most of these neighbours, and they've all been so grateful and enthusiastic about the whole project. It's been good.
A pest control expert has told RNZ the bait will be a short to medium term fix, as there's probably no way to fully eradicate the Argentine ants now that they're here. In Kapiti, for Checkpoint, Jonathan Mitchell.
And that is Checkpoint for the week. Thanks everyone for being with us. Checkpoint is, of course, a production of RNZ News, but we do have a small permanent team. Pip King, Catherine Wallbridge, Bridget Burke, Michelle Cook, Zach Fleming, Kelvin Samuel, and our brilliant sound recordist led by Jeremy Ansell, who was on tonight. Let's have a look. Let's have a look. There he is. On behalf of the excellent Checkpoint team and everyone involved in the program, thank you for being with us. Have a fantastic weekend, and we will be back Monday at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A Canterbury quantity surveyor says millions of dollars have been wasted on quake repairs because the damage was never diagnosed properly. The Southern District Health Board is offering vaccinations to children and staff at an Oamaru kindergarten following an outbreak of hepatitis A. Health Ministry officials have warned that District Health Board deficits could climb to $225 million this year. The plant disease myrtle rust has been found in the South Island for the first time, and a drone has disrupted flights at Auckland Airport this afternoon. Next news and weather at 7.
Country Life this week is checking out a Central North Island cycle trail. Has it been a worthwhile investment?
Absolutely. We've done about 3 different trips now to New Zealand to do the different cycleways.
Summer is almost as busy as winter now with the amount of mountain bikers through. You know, New World's got queues in it and a lot of the cafes.